The Ansari Institute presents Engaged, Religion and the Common Good, a conversation series exploring questions relating to global affairs and the human condition. The series covers a variety of topics from poverty and peace to climate change and good governance, as well as tradition and technology. Our conversations engage local and global partners, including students, educators, and journalists. For suggestions on topics and themes, please email us at ansari@nd.edu. Hello, I'm Charles Powell, and I'm joined today by Chad Meister. Chad holds a PhD in philosophy from Marquette University. In 2015, he was a visiting research scholar at the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies and the William Peyton Fellow at the John Hicks Center for Global Philosophy of Religion at the University of Birmingham in England. Chad is a scholar of global religion, who has published a number of books on religion and religious diversity. Moreover, Chad is affiliated faculty at the Ansari Institute. Chad, my friend, what else would you like to add to this introduction? Tell us more about what you have going on in your career.
Hi, Charles. Well, thank you very much for taking some time to dialogue with me this morning. I appreciate that. It's good to see you. I could add that I taught philosophy and theology for 25 years. The last 5 of those were I was the chair of the Department of Religion and Philosophy at Bethel College, which is now Bethel University. I've been engaged in doing work in global philosophy of religion and comparative religion, comparative theology for some time. I have a passion for it. It's an honor for me to be a part of the Ansari Institute. I've worked on a number of projects over these years, both writing books, editing and co-editing volumes. I'm currently the co-editor of 2 series with Cambridge University Press. One is entitled Elements, Religion and Monotheism. These are concise volumes that focus on significant topics in the monotheistic traditions. So the series is doing actually quite well. We have, I think, around 30 volumes with no end in sight. And the contributors to these books are from across the religious traditions. And it's just been a real joy to engage with the authors in this series. And I'm also the co-editor of another book series with Cambridge called Cambridge Studies in Religion, Philosophy, and Society. And there too, we're bringing in scholars. These are longer monographs and bringing in scholars from across the religious traditions to engage in important topics in religion and philosophy. I'm also interested in interreligious dialogue. And so I'm currently working on a book, which we can maybe talk about more later on that topic, but also involved in more local interfaith engagement through not only the Ansari Institute, but also a local interfaith organization called the United Religious Community. And a number of years ago, through the United Religious Community, I started 2 interfaith groups, which were just a lot of fun and hopefully beneficial. One involved religious scholars and leaders and others from the community who wanted to spend some time talking together. And so we met a couple times a month, and that went on for several years. And then I got too busy with many other things, so I'm hoping to actually start that back up again. And then also I started an interfaith group with students from the various colleges and universities in our area called the Interreligious Student Community. And there we would bring in a speaker. We met once a month, and then we would, engage in dialogue. We'd usually have food involved. Food is always a helpful thing to have involved for discussions of that sort. And then we actually ended up having an event at St. Mary's College in the local area here, not too far from the University of Notre Dame, where we brought in scholars, religious leaders, and students from across the area. And it was just it was a really great event of learning from one another and engaging in interfaith dialogue. So those are some of the things I've been working on and doing of recent times. I'm also involved in doing some spiritual care work at a local behavioral health facility. It's an interfaith group where we meet and discuss matters of spirituality. And so that's also been a real joy. And as I noted, I'm also working on some writing projects. So I'm keeping busy with many good things, maybe too many good things at this point.
Indeed, you are. And so, again, I want to say thank you for taking this time to have this conversation with us. For this conversation, I would like to hear you share more about some of the work you have been doing in the areas of philosophy of religion and theological pluralism. I remember taking Intro to Philosophy of Religion with Dr. Steve Lemke. Dr. Steve Lemke was professor at the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary in 2004. And to this day, I think it was my favorite course I ever took in seminary.
Hmm.
I remember Dr. Lemke saying that philosophy is a discipline that strikes many students as abstract and disengaged. He said students who are pragmatically oriented may wonder what specific contribution philosophy will make to their ministry. Then he raised two questions. The first question he raised was, is studying philosophy useful? And the second question, how can it help you, at the time referring to me as a minister and to the other students, be a better minister?
Hmm.
I know Professor Lemke believed that an understanding of the philosophy of religion was and is of utmost importance. And Chad, I think you feel the same way.
Hmm.
Some years back, you wrote a book introducing philosophy of religion. What inspired you to write that book?
Well, what inspired me to write the book is that a scholar had submitted a proposal to an academic press to write a book on the philosophy of religion, and the press sent it out for review, and I was one of the reviewers of the proposal. And I thought there were many good aspects of the proposal, but I also had a number of suggestions that I thought would enhance the project, including the inclusion of diverse perspectives, looking at different philosophies of religion from different traditions, including a chapter on religious pluralism, including pedagogical features so that it could be useful as a textbook as well. And so the author did not like the suggestions, but the press really liked the suggestions. So the author decided to disband the project, and then the press asked me if I would write a proposal for this, and it was something I had been interested in for some time anyway. So I was very excited to write the proposal for the book, which I did. And I also thought it would be helpful to have an anthology of resources, of primary resources, classic and contemporary. So when I submitted that proposal, I also submitted another proposal to the press for an additional book, an anthology of resources, sort of as a compendium to go along with the text. And they ended up supporting both of those ideas, and so I ended up getting two books out of the project. And so I've used the book myself on a number of occasions in teaching, and it's been used in other institutions as well, including at the University of Notre Dame. So it's been a while, though, since that book was published. And so the publisher reached out here this past year, asked me if I would do a new edition of the work. And so we sent it out for review. I got 3 reviewers back and some helpful input. So it's going to be updated and some additional chapters included. So I'm looking forward to working on that this year. Hopefully this year. It might be early next year. We'll see.
That's terrific news. In your book, you explore the impact of religious diversity and pluralism. Can you define and offer a bit of an explanation on what these two concepts mean?
Mm.
Religious diversity and religious pluralism.
So religious diversity is simply the fact that there are significant differences in belief and practice. And you see this among the different religious traditions. I think with the exception of those in very isolated communities, for some time, most people have been aware of the plethora of differences of belief and practices among the different traditions. But with the rise of globalization, I think we're today much more aware of this diversity than we have been in the past. So, but this awareness, I think, in turn, gives rise to some important questions. questions about the relation between the different faith traditions, questions about the implications of religious disagreement and how that might impact our own faith, our own religious beliefs and commitments. And when you look at the religious diversity, it's much more, of course, than merely looking at different rituals or different architecture or different dress. One of the most helpful ways, I think, to think about diversity is to utilize the work of a global religion scholar named Ninian Smart. Ninian Smart created what he referred to as the 7 dimensions of religion in terms of the framework of thinking about and understanding religious traditions. So I can just real quickly mention these 7 just to give a sense of the kind of diversity that we see in the different religious traditions. For example, there's the ritual dimension of religion, which involves the religions of worship, participation of sacraments, and so forth. There's the what he calls the narrative and mythic dimensions of religion. So if you think of the stories and myths that provide a foundation for the tradition. So for example, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, you could think of the creation account in the book of Genesis, for example. There are the experiential and emotional dimensions of religion. These would involve things like mystical experiences, conversions, the sort of emotive responses to the sacred that we might have, feelings of awe, feelings of dread, guilt, perhaps bliss, inner peace, those types of things. Fourth, he talked about the social and institutional dimensions of religion, which have to do with its organization, its leadership structures, and so forth. And you see among the traditions some similarities and some differences in these. Fifth is the ethical and legal dimension. So this would involve the rules and laws that govern the behaviors of religious followers. You can see this through the moral codes and the various legal prescriptions that are offered. Sixth are the philosophical and doctrinal dimensions. Here, this has to do with the beliefs, the doctrines, the theological ideas that you find in the traditions. And then lastly is the material dimension. And this would include the physical and material expressions of religion having to do with things like its architecture, the icons or other objects that are used, the texts, the sacred books, and other artifacts that have religious significance. So when you think about these 7 dimensions of religion, and then you begin to explore the different religious traditions, you see that there are some incredible differences that we have, some similarities as well, but just amazing differences. And so it's these differences among the traditions that raise the kind of questions I think that are significant here in understanding one another, in engaging in interfaith dialogue, but also in thinking about our own beliefs and commitments and how we understand those in relation in response to other traditions. So what's I think interesting about thinking about religious diversity is that there's a sort of a generally utilized model in the field of the philosophy of religion and religious studies. It's a tripartite or 3-part model of thinking about religious others in relation to oneself. And the 3 parts are a pluralistic understanding of the religious faith. Sometimes this is called religious pluralism or theological pluralism. And the general gist of most pluralistic accounts is that all religion, or at least the major religious traditions, are equally valid paths to the one transcendent divine reality. So an analogy that's sometimes used of this pluralistic approach is if you think of a mountain which has different roads to the peak, and it's not that one road is better or superior to another road, they're just different ways of getting to the top. And so on a number of these pluralistic accounts, that's what religion is about. Different paths, different ways of accessing, pursuing the divine and enlightenment and liberation and salvation. So that's pluralism. That's one of these 3 approaches to religious diversity. The second one is kind of in contrast to that, and that is religious exclusivism. And this is the idea that only one religion provides the right and true path to salvation and liberation and spiritual transformation. This is a view that historically has been pretty widely held among the traditions, in particular the monotheistic traditions, still fairly widely held today. Then the third view is an attempt to forge a middle way or a middle path between pluralism on the one hand and exclusivism on the other hand. And this position is called religious inclusivism. And it includes aspects of exclusivism in the sense that it maintains that there is one path, one true and right path to salvation, liberation, but that one doesn't have to fully understand that tradition or that path to be able to enter into it. So it's exclusivistic in that sense, but it's also pluralistic in the sense that it attempts to validate all the other traditions and says that there are truths in these other traditions as well. I think a helpful example here is the author C.S. Lewis, who wrote about this in a number of his works. Perhaps one of the most famous is in his book, The Last Battle, one of the volumes of the Chronicles of Narnia, where you have this battle going on between the army of the White Witch and the army of Aslan. And after the battle is over, you have one of the creatures that was fighting on the side of the White Witch and of the sort of evil god Tash, who ends up in Narnia after the battle is over. And so then he has this conversation with Aslan, the representative of, well, for Lewis, the representative of God or Jesus. So he ends up in Narnia, which is heaven, and is talking to Aslan, the God figure. And he says, I don't really understand why I'm here, because I was in the army of Tash, but here I am in Narnia. Why is that? And basically Aslan says, well, with your mouth, you were affirming Tash, but in your heart, you were actually following me. So he used this as an example, I think, to promote this inclusivistic idea that one doesn't have to be a member of the one sort of ultimately true tradition in order to receive liberation and salvation. So that's the inclusivist idea. Yeah. So we have these three models, these three different ways of thinking about religious diversity. We have on the one hand pluralism, on the other hand we have exclusivism, and then sort of the middle way is inclusivism.
Chad, I've heard you talk about the term modest pluralism. What do you mean by that term, and how does it differ from other forms of pluralism that you've just mentioned?
Yeah, so as I've been thinking about religious pluralism, inclusivism, and exclusivism for a very long time, and the last couple of years, as I've been studying pluralism in more depth than I have in the past, what I realized is there are some, I think, helpful ways of thinking about pluralism and some problematic aspects of it. Probably the most prominent form of religious pluralism is that articulated by the philosopher of religion, John Hick. And so John Hick wrote about religious pluralism in a number of contexts, a number of books and articles, the most famous of which is his an interpretation of religion. So Hick affirms what he calls the pluralistic hypothesis. The pluralistic hypothesis includes the idea that all the major world religions offer different human responses to the divine. So all the world religions offer different human responses to the divine. The divine, what he refers to as ultimate reality, or what he calls the real, capital R, is ultimately for Hick beyond human comprehension, but can be experienced, authentically experienced, Hick argues, in various ways, depending on one's own cultural and historical context. So each religion then interprets this transcendent reality through its own cultural lens. And because we have different lenses, therefore the doctrines, the beliefs, the practices, so forth, are going to be different. So for Hick, all paths, I should qualify that because Hick doesn't say all religions, but he's referring to all of the major world religions. The reason he narrows that is because he makes the claim that, as you can see within all of these major world religions, a certain kind of moral and spiritual component in which they're producing people of moral and spiritual excellence, saints, for example. Um, and he argues that you don't find in one tradition, let's say, more people who are morally and spiritually, exemplar. Uh, so so he focuses on those. He doesn't worry about the sort of new or upstart or smaller traditions. He just focuses on those. But his point is that within all of those, we have equally valid paths to the divine. So of course, this position is contrary to the exclusivist path that says that there's only one way to salvation. So as I said, I've spent a lot of time working on Hicks' pluralistic hypothesis, and have found just a number of what I think are problems with it. It's not just I think. In fact, I think there have been something like, well, I won't give a number, but there have been many books and articles written in response to Hicks' pluralistic hypothesis, many criticisms and critiques. And so even though it is, like I said, probably the most widely held form of religious pluralism, it's not without certain problems. So as I was thinking about that, I began realizing that there are some aspects of Hicks pluralism that just seem to be true, and other aspects of it that are problematic. So I'm actually developing this version of pluralism that I'm calling modest pluralism. I use the word modest. That's probably a misnomer because I'm claiming it's true. So how modest is that? But it is, I think, an approach that recognizes a lot of the good insights that Hick provided, and then also some critique. So in a nutshell, I can explain it if you'd like.
Yes, please.
Okay. So I agree with Hick that there is no objective or universally accepted way of finding one religious tradition to be epistemically superior to another, or that's closer to the truth. There's just no objective way of doing that. We can't use the scientific method, for example, to hone in on, through experimental verification, which one is closer to approximating the truth. So I agree with Hick on that. I agree with Hick that there are many different approaches to the divine that can't be ranked in any particular way. I think you can't say, well, if you look at Buddhism, it's over here, and Islam's here, and Christianity is there. There's just no good way to do that. And also, I agree with Hick that when you look at these different traditions, you do find, it seems, something of a par in terms of there being saints and sinners. You find people who are really excelling in moral and spiritual formation. And then you find others who are not doing well at all that way, and perhaps becoming even destructive toward others. So given that, where are we? What do we do? Well, I think in some sense we have to just do the best we can with refining, honing, developing our own understanding, our own belief system. That is the one that we find to be most natural and most reasonable. So in my case, for example, I come from a Christian tradition. And that seems to me to be the most natural and plausible approach to take. But I also have a number of friends who are coming from other traditions. I have a number of friends who are Muslim, a number of friends who are Hindu, and they also believe that their tradition is the one that is most natural and most reasonable to them. And so, however, logically, it seems that you can't have all the different descriptions of the transcendent reality being true. So, for example, it seems like it can't be the case that that the transcendent is both personal and impersonal. It seems that you can't have the transcendent reality being both Trinitarian in the way that Christians have understood that, and also very monotheistic in the way that the Jews and Muslims have affirmed. So these different views can't all be true. But the problem is we can't know for sure, it seems to me, in this life, which one more closely approximates the truth. So what can we do? Well, like I said, we can continue to hone and refine our own belief systems and then wait expectantly for the eschaton, when then hopefully we will no longer see through a glass dimly, as the Apostle Paul states it. So given that I do come from this tradition, I think that we will find that in the eschaton. Okay, so the form of modest pluralism that I'm affirming is inclusive, in that I believe that the Christian gospel offers good news for all people. Salvation is available to everyone, regardless of what tradition they're affirming. But it's not inclusive in the traditional religious inclusivism sense, in that it doesn't claim that one religion is ultimately superior, that contains significant truths, that and others are only second class, as some forms of inclusivism do. Modest pluralism recognizes that there are spiritual giants in all of the faith traditions, that we might call this a kind of spiritual plurality that recognizes the deeply spiritual lives that we find within individuals from across the traditions. And it's also what I call an alethic exclusivism. By alethic, that has to do with truth. So because in the end, I affirm that Christ is the savior of all mankind, not, say, Krishna or Siddhartha Gautama. So to put it, concisely, I could say something like this. So modest pluralism is making the claim that there are rich spiritual truths in all of the major world religions. There is no objective way of determining that one religion is epistemically superior to another, that we should follow the path that seems natural and reasonable to us. And while there is an ultimate truth to the matter of who God is, that salvation is open to all, regardless of one's own religious tradition. So, of course, the way I presented this, it's coming from a Christian form of modest pluralism, but you could adopt the same viewpoint coming from any other tradition. So you could affirm an Islamic form of modest pluralism, or a Hindu form of modest pluralism. And so I think it has the value. Of course, this is a claim I'm making now. It's got to be defended and argued for. But I think that the position that I'm articulating here provides some benefits that that Hicks' pluralistic hypothesis doesn't. I think it solves some of the problems, the philosophical problems that he raises. And I think it also respects each of the traditions in their own belief system, in which there can be dignity and respect offered for those traditions. Whereas on Hicks' view, in the end, what Hicks claims is that none of the religious traditions are really offering truth. They're all sort of diluted and just sort of groping for the truth. So I think it has some benefits, but we will see once I get it out there and publish on this, and hear the feedback and so forth. We'll see how this goes. But that, in a nutshell, is modest pluralism.
Chad, in the introductory matters, you mentioned many of the hats that you're wearing, and I believe one of those hats is practical theologian. Richard Osmer, who is a professor at Princeton Theological Seminary, wrote a book on practical theological interpretation. And he begins with the descriptive empirical task of asking what is going on. And I see you've clearly done that with John Hick. And then the interpretive task of asking why is it going on, and then moving to the normative task, what ought to be going on, and you certainly have your thoughts there. Now I think we come to this task of what can we do about it?
Mm.
And you're working on this new book that you've already mentioned on interreligious dialogue. And you have a chapter that focuses on modest pluralism. What's the connection? Why does it matter?
Yeah, that's an important question. I think it matters for a number of reasons. So I want to be clear, though, before I make this point, that I think that if a person is affirming religious exclusivism, if a person is affirming religious inclusivism, that they can still engage in, productive dialogue. However, I think that modest pluralism offers some benefits for interfaith dialogue that some of the others, the other two, have some problems with inherently. So, for example, if you hold the view that your particular tradition is the true and right path and other traditions have no truth, then when you attempt to engage in dialogue, can you really hear the other? I mean, I think if you work hard at it, you could, but I think that it sort of lends itself to, to desiring conversion. I mean, if after all, as a number of people from the, let's say, Christian and Islamic traditions who are exclusivist affirm, if they don't get the right views here, they're going to end up in hell. So it seems that it makes it challenging to really engage in a dialogue with the other if, while you're engaging in dialogue, you think that person's going to hell unless they end up believing what I believe. So again, I think you can do it, but I think it's more difficult. Um, I think it's easier for the inclusivist to do it than the exclusivist. But on the other hand, one of the criticisms of religious inclusivism is that it's making the claim that my particular tradition is superior to yours, that yours has less light than mine, and that comes across as offensive to a number of religious adherents. So again, I think as an inclusivist, you could engage in productive dialogue, and there's been many calls to do so by inclusivists. I think even Vatican II and Nostra Aetate did a beautiful job of encouraging interfaith dialogue and so forth. But I think that this notion of modest pluralism opens up even a more productive path for dialogue. By the way, I should say as a side note that I think this modest pluralism that I'm proposing here is not inconsistent with Nostra Aetate. I think it's actually consistent with it, but it's taking it it has some conclusions and ramifications that I think haven't been developed, at least that I've seen in the Catholic tradition. But I think, for example, if you're forming a modest pluralism, first of all, you're acknowledging the multiple truths in other traditions. You're respecting them, offering them dignity by saying, I recognize that within your tradition you are producing spiritual giants, and there's something there that I can really learn from. I know in my own personal experience this has been the case. This has been the case. I have some very close friends who are both Muslim and Hindu, and I have learned a lot from these friends of mine. Just to give you two particular examples, being around some Islamic families, like I have been very closely, my wife and I, for a number of years, we've learned, I think, how to pray more deeply, how to pray on a more regular basis, how to pray more consistently than we did before, just in the dialogue and the experience that we've had with them. From my Hindu friends, I've learned much about meditation. And they're Hindu, not Buddhist, but nevertheless, in the particular Advaita Vedanta stream of Buddhism that one of the friends in particular is a part of, meditation is a significant part of that. And so he and I were actually in England together and went on a number of hiking trips. And he would just stop and say, we need to meditate here. And so I've just learned from him the sort of deeper kind of meditation that I'd ever experienced. So I think it fosters learning and respect. I think it reduces the kind of potential internal and external, really, conflict that we can be because of not having the sort of tensions that arise in exclusivism, in which you're saying, well, you're completely wrong, I'm completely right. That doesn't tend to foster mutuality and respect and so forth. And I think it also leads to a stronger communities, because when you really do look at the other in a way that you're deeply respecting their beliefs and asking truly, what can I learn from you? I think then we can work together. We can engage in projects together. We can work on a shared set of goals to support the common good. So anyway, I think there are other reasons, but I think these are some of the reasons why this particular approach to religious diversity enhances interfaith dialogue. And so I'm writing about that in this current book that I'm working on.
Beautifully said. Pope Francis said, get to know another religion and you'll learn more about your own religion. Dr.
Yes.
Meister, Chad, thank you for spending a few moments of your day with us. I look forward to reading your book on interreligious dialogue. Do you have a title for it yet?
Still working on the title. I'm still
All
working.
right.
Yes.
Well, thank you for helping us to have a deeper understanding of modest pluralism and how it can aid us in developing understanding and profound levels of trust that can lead to collaboration with people of other faith traditions. Chad, I wonder, do you have any final words, and how can people who are listening be in touch with you?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you again for this dialogue. I appreciate you, Charles, all that you're doing for the Ansari Institute for Interfaith Dialogue on both the local and broader and even global levels. I appreciate that. I think that, well, in terms of reaching me personally, one could reach out to my email address. I have, well, I'll just give my Gmail address, which is drchadmeister@gmail.com, very easy to remember. They didn't have any spaces left for just Chad Meister, so I had to go with something extra. So that would be one way to reach me. Um, I think I would just add that, well, to quote, it's not a direct quote, but roughly what the Sanskrit scholar Max Mueller said, which went something like this. Um, if you only know one religion, you don't really know any religion. And the idea is that the more we learn from others, the more I think we better understand ourselves and our own tradition. And so I just want to encourage people to learn from others, to take seriously that, we're all striving for the best, and seeking to, those of us who are religious, that is, seeking to be transformed by the divine. And I think there's so much we can learn from each other.
Chad, thank you. Audience, thank you for joining us. Until next time, I'm Charles Powell. Goodbye.